Hello, it's Greg Otten here with MaritimeGardening.com, and today I'm going to talk a little bit about some of my observations with regard to asparagus and growing it in the garden. Asparagus is a wonderful perennial to have growing in your garden. You plant it once, you have to wait a number of years, and then eventually you've got a yearly supply of delicious, healthy asparagus. And it's also like one of those first things you can eat out of your garden in the spring, right? There's very few things you can eat this time of year unless you were like cutting the tips off of your garlic greens or whatever, but there's really not a lot. You know, asparagus, rhubarb, there's only a handful of things in a colder northern climate that are really harvestable in, what is this now? Today is May 6th. So my asparagus are still not harvestable. They're maybe only 3 inches high right now. But I would imagine in a number of days or a week at the most, they'll probably be the right size to snap off and eat. There's two topics I want to discuss where asparagus are concerned. Whether you should plant them from seed or plant them from those bare root transplants you can buy in a bag at a garden center that always look kind of sick. You might want to guess where I'm going with that. Oh, and the other topic is you got an asparagus bed and you've got weeds. How do you deal with that situation? Because you don't want to mess up the asparagus and you've got these weeds growing in among them. It's a bit problematic, so how do you deal with that? So I'll give you some ideas about that as well, at least just my thoughts on that. So first here I want to talk about seeds or transplants. All the asparagus I have growing in my garden right now I bought as transplants. You buy a bag of, there's a bit of soil and some roots in it and a little some asparagus crowns. There might be like 6 in a bag and they cost $5.99 or something like that. Or maybe there's 10 in a bag, and some of them are big and some of them are small. So you spend $6 and you get 6, or you spend $6 and get like 10, maybe it's 10, something like that. That's not a whole lot. And I planted some of mine in 2013, I planted some of them in 2014, and I even think I planted some in 2015. And now it's 2018. I've never eaten them since I've been in this location. My old house I inherited. There was an asparagus patch at that old house. I'd never grown them before, but it was wonderful every year. You get a nice, probably a couple good meals worth out of that patch. And I vowed when I got my next house I was going to plant a massive asparagus patch, and then you know, you get distracted and life happens, and I mean, it's a lot of these things in a garden. There's a certain time that there might be a 1-month window of time to do it in a given year, and then if you don't do it you got to wait a whole nother year. So you know, we like to be relaxed and we like to do things we want, and that's the way gardening should be. But boy, there's certain things you got to do it 5 years ahead of time, and it takes asparagus 4 or 5 years to start producing shoots of a size where you can harvest. Also, the crown is of a size where you can take some of the shoots and it really doesn't weaken it too much. It still has enough, enough left to send energy back down to the roots to re-energize itself for the next year. As you might notice, the black flies are upon me today. It's a nice warm day. We've had finally had two decent days of heat. And I'm going to do another video where I take you around the garden and show you how things are doing. But yesterday it was warm enough to be out here with a t-shirt. That was the first day this year that was the case. I think it might have got up to 18 degrees Celsius here. And today is supposed to be a similar day. So it's nice to finally have some heat. It would have been good to have that a little bit sooner, but it's early May. What are we going to do? Anyway, today we're talking about asparagus. My experience of buying the bagged transplants is that it's really not worth the money. From everything I've read, the only advantage of them is that it accelerates things by 1 year. So per plant you're paying way more per plant, right? You buy a bag of seeds and you get 20 or 30 asparagus seeds in the bag for, you know, $1.99 or $3, maybe $4 at the most, depending on what variety of seed you buy. I think the Vessi seed one, my sponsor, I think the seeds are $2.99. Someone can, I haven't confirmed that, so don't sue me if that's wrong. I don't remember the price being outrageous. I bought some and I planted some here. There's a bed right here. If I could go back in time, And I think that's the best advice to get from any gardener is, if I could go back in time, I would do X, right? If I could go back in time, if it was 2013 again, the year I was claiming this space, if I could choose that year to have planted tomatoes, which I love and I look forward to every year, but let's say you only have a finite amount of time, right? If I had to choose between planting tomatoes or asparagus, if I could go back in time, absolutely I would have put my energy into planting a nice asparagus bed that year. So now it's 2018 and I'm planting some asparagus, and I will get to enjoy them, a small amount of them, in 2023 when I'm wearing my jetpack and it's the future. Right? But if I don't do it now, I gotta wait a whole nother year to do it, right? Because this is the time to plant, and it's easier to plant in the spring because you've got rain and it's not as hot and things can germinate without you having to bring them along and water them. And yes, like you can transplant them and grow them indoors, and I don't usually do that. I plant everything outside. I just find it easier. You put the seed down, you put a bit of mulch over it, and usually they take care of themselves and they're better off for it, and it's way less work on your part. I think a lot of the energy complaints people have about how difficult gardening is because they do it in these messed up, convoluted, middleman sort of ways where, the way nature works is a seed falls off a plant, lands on the ground, and the seed grows. and everything else and then the animals come along and eat it, right? Well, you're the animal, so that's the system you should use in your garden. Put the seed in the ground, and then later on come along and eat it. And if you've got healthy soil and you've got a handful of the plant's needs taken care of, it really will take care of itself. So maybe I'll grab the camera and bring it a little bit closer, but let me show you here. Oh yeah, it's the old guy grunt. So over there is where I've got the transplanted asparagus, and I got a little bit of footage I'll show you in a minute of how they're doing, why I planted them there, and the weed issues I have there, and how I think is the best way to go about dealing with the weeds. Suffice it to say, that wasn't a great spot to plant them because there's always weeds coming in from the forest beyond, encroaching in these different kinds of weird invasive weeds. So if I could go back in time, I wouldn't have planted them there. Right? So this bed here, it's a nice pretty little round bed. It's maybe 6 feet long and 4 feet wide. And this bed had, the camera's a little bit crooked here, apologies. This had kale in it last year. And I got a wonderful kale garden out of it. In fact, the kale that was growing here last year, the seeds I just broadcast the seeds over the soil the previous fall, and they survived all winter and came up. It was really miraculous. For some reason, I didn't do that this past fall. Anyway, I decided to make this a dedicated asparagus bed because it's not bordering against the weedy forest over there, the weedy field, right? It's got its own sort of space. So it should be just asparagus. Now, what's that hay doing in the middle? Because the asparagus aren't going to amount to anything this year, right? If I'm lucky, they'll be, I don't know, just little tiny asparagus plants, almost look like some sort of grassy weed, right? They're not going to amount to much. I don't want to get something out of the space. So I decided to plant peas down the middle, a bush variety of peas. That's all that is. And the only reason there's a stick there was to sort of keep the hay from blowing away. Once hay's been rained on a few times, it sort of meshes together and stays in place. But the day I put that hay down, it was very windy and it would have blown away. And why is there stakes in there? That was just so I could make a straight line to put the peas, just so I'd know where the line is. And also I will build a trellis across that for the peas to go up. And so I'm going to leave those stakes there just to know where to put the trellis sticks. Maybe I'll do a video on that today, in fact. The black flies aren't that bad yet. And doing things like trellises when the black flies are bad is a nightmare because you need both your hands. Anyway, let me take the camera off here. So what I've done so far, and I'm going to plant some more today, but I just made little rows and planted the seeds in these rows. Right. Here's another row here. There's a couple sticks here because I ran out of seeds here. I went and bought some more, so I'm going to plant some more today. Right. But I just made a little furrow in the ground and put the seeds down, and then I put a little bit of seaweed over top. And you can tell the soil here, it's got a little bit of wood chip. This was a wood chip covered garden. This soil is a bit moist, but the soil with just this little bit of seaweed is visibly darker. Maybe it's not coming across on camera, but you can see it's visibly, I can see it's visibly darker. And the asparagus will have no problem finding their way through that. Look at that snail. You're dead. So that's how I've planted them. So this bed will take, 5 years to be a food producing bed, which is a bit depressing, but again, that's the advice. If I could go back 5 years in time, I would have planted this as all, or some other place. I would have built a dedicated asparagus garden. If you've been thinking about it, we're running out of spring, plant your asparagus now. The ones over here that I planted as transplants, which cost way more to do. I don't even know if I'll get enough for a meal this year, 2018, right? Some of them were planted 2013. I'd be surprised. So I don't think it's worth your time. If you were considering, if money's an issue, you don't, if something takes 5 years and it only takes 4 years by spending 10 times as much, it's not worth it, right? just wait another year and get way more, right? Also, if the seed was started and lived its whole life in your particular soil, I think the plants would just be happier in general because they're used to that situation and they're adapted to it. All right, well, here's a spot in my garden where I've got asparagus. If you're watching last week, I was planting carrots over here, right? And I stopped right here basically because I know my asparagus starts somewhere along here, because the idea was, you can see at the very back against the fence there's raspberries right all along there. The idea is I'd have raspberries along the border, and then I'd have asparagus in front, so the whole thing would be perennial. That's the idea. But it turns out, at least from the experience here, see, beyond the fence is just all the kind of weeds that were growing on my garden. So what you can see back here, all this stuff, whatever this is, different things, a blackberry, and I can't even name all the things in there, just all 1,000 different kinds of weeds. Right, what's growing in there is what was this whole area where my garden is. It was all that. I just covered it in cardboard and covered in actually initially I covered the whole area in sawdust from a mill. And then I brought in horse manure and worked with the existing soil and built it up to a fairly nice garden. The problem with having this garden here against the border, and I've done other videos discussing this general problem, is that those aggressive weeds that are out there, many of them are the kind that they travel underground and then they pop up, right? Their roots go underground and pop up. And so they're always coming up here. And I think the raspberries can kind of hold their own for the most part in that situation. But it creates problems when you're growing something like an asparagus. So let me show you, because it's hard to know when to weed. And I had someone ask me a question about this, and this is the main reason I'm doing this video, among other things, is to address that question. So, where is it now? You can see, here's a spot. So there is an asparagus right there, right? That's starting to come up. And I got a couple other spots where there's a slug right there. You, my friend, are goldfish food. Let's give him a bit of a squish there. Anyway, so the problem is, like, here's another one. Here's a good example. So there's an asparagus coming up. Right next to it I got a wild blackberry coming up. And these aren't blackberries you want. They don't taste very good. They're not very productive. They're probably good for the local animals and stuff like that. So I got different weeds like that. A little creeping buttercup here. And oh, there's more blackberry there. I've got it everywhere. So, I mean, I don't mind the raspberries, the cultivated varieties of raspberries I have migrating this way a bit. I don't mind this taking over that way. But it's very difficult to weed, especially early in the season, because you know a lot of your asparagus still haven't even come up yet, and they're very tender, very easy to break, and you don't want to damage them. Look, there's another little shoot right there. Right. So my advice to anyone in that situation is to wait. These asparagus are only, what is it, it's 2018, and some of them were planted in 2013, some of them were planted in 2014, and some of them were planted in 2015. There's another one. And they're just starting to have edible size now, some of them. And I planted these as the bare root starts, so they were a year or two old when they were planted. That was the idea anyway. I thought that would accelerate things. Here's another one right here. Right, so they're up. There's probably, they'll become more visible as we go along. Anyway, in terms of trying to weed this, because you do want to get some of these weeds under control, the only option you have, in my opinion, like look, here's a blackberry, or I'm pretty sure it's a blackberry. Might be a raspberry. Actually, maybe it is a raspberry. I can't tell. No, that's blackberry right there. Right? That whole vine is blackberry. Right, all this stuff is a problem. There's another asparagus right there, in amongst all this weeds and stuff. Right, there's a nice little asparagus tip. My advice would be to wait until you've harvested a few of your, the way asparagus works is you harvest maybe half of what comes out of the crown, you leave the rest alone, you let it grow. So I would leave the weeding. It's never hard to find a good reason not to weed, but I would just leave the weeding alone for now until you're done harvesting your asparagus. Right, once you've feel that you've harvested enough and you want to leave the plants alone and let them just grow and re-energize the root base, right, wait till they're nice and high, right, wait till they've got a good height and the stems are woody and not very breakable, right, wait till they're tough, and then go in and weed. And also, once they're high, you'll know where the asparagus are and where they aren't. Basically, in this garden, for instance, everything that isn't a raspberry or an asparagus doesn't belong. So then it's relatively easy. I mean, you can go and actually weed everything up, but probably a much easier approach would just be to snap everything off and then cover it with some newspaper or cardboard or something like that, and then put some mulch over top of that. Right? That's probably the easiest. That's probably all I would do here, like a blackberry vine like this. I just cut it down there, cover, right? And I mean, it's a bit tedious because you have to use little bits of paper and fit it around and make it, form to the area. But all you do is if it's paper, like newspaper, you just make it all wet in a bucket and use it almost like paper mache. That it'll take the shape you want, and you can just shape it around things. You can put it around your asparagus. You put a good layer of that down, and then put the mulch over that, and that's weeded for the year, right? In an area like this, what's this, about 20 feet long by about 2 feet from front to back, I could treat that whole area in about an hour, no problem. Anyway, just a few thoughts about asparagus. Why you should grow it, why it's such a great plant to grow. If you haven't got it in your garden, you got some space, get it going somewhere. And even though you're going to lose that space for a number of years in terms of there's other things you could grow there, there are ways like what I've done here where you can put some things in with it for the first couple of years, right? They should get along together, and plant something that you can take out, right? Like a pea or a bean or something like that, something that's going to, peas add nitrogen to the soil, so I'm putting a companion plant in here that's going to feed the soil, so it makes a lot of sense. And that way I get something out of this space while I'm nursing along these asparagus. And all I'm going to do is let these grow, and every fall I'll put a mulch over it and just let them grow and put a mulch over it every fall, and eventually I'll have a big beautiful asparagus. If I'm still a YouTube guy 5 years from now, I'll do a follow-up video. So I hope you found that helpful and gave you some good ideas for this year. If you haven't planted asparagus yet and you like eating asparagus, get it in the ground. It's very good for you. Thanks for watching. Subscribe, sub-bell, give me a thumbs up, all that good stuff. Check out my Facebook page. Check out my podcast, maritimegardening.com. And until next time, get out there, get at it, have fun in your garden.